You're listening to the Healing from CPTSD podcast. My name is Justin Vanderwind, and I am your host. In today's episode, I'm going to be talking about what our obligation is to toxic family members. If you haven't done so already, be sure to visit our website at healingfromcptsd.com and sign up on our email list for regular updates, as well as a free weekly newsletter. If you're interested in taking your life back from CPTSD and narcissistic abuse, the Healing from CPTSD course is now available on our YouTube channel completely free of charge. This course has some of the best tools and strategies for understanding and overcoming CPTSD in your life. Feel free to check it out. All links will be in the description below. Hey everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Healing from CPTSD. My name is Justin Vanderwind, and I am your host. So in today's episode, I wanted to talk a little bit about what our obligation is to toxic family members. And I'm bringing this up at this particular time because I'm actually going through something along these lines in my personal life right now. And I kind of wanted to share a little bit about my own personal experiences, what's going on, and then talk a little bit about, what my obligation is to my toxic family members, and then, what my thoughts and feelings are on anyone's obligations to toxic family members. Because this is a really tough area for a lot of us who have had, if you've got a toxic spouse or partner or something, I mean, it's still hard, but at least you can sort of break up with them or divorce them or whatever if you want to get away from them, and there's no obligation. You don't have that sort of like confused, uncertain feelings of guilt or uncertainty about what your role should be, if you should be in their lives or not. When you're dealing with family, especially when you're talking about things, when people start getting older and they start losing the ability to take care of themselves and stuff along those lines, or when they're at the, sort of at that point in their life when they're going to pass away soon, what's our obligation to that? So to kind of share with you what I'm dealing with right now, I've got my narcissistic mother in my life, but there's also there's my sister. I have one full-blooded sister who I've had the most, time with as far as a relationship is concerned. I have two half-sisters with my father's second wife and a half-brother with my father's third wife. They're all exes. So anyway, this is my main sister, right? My primary sister came back because I hadn't talked to her in years. And the main reason for that is because I don't think she's a narcissist, but she's got some serious narcissistic fleas and some raging code. She's got a lot of problems that she just hasn't dealt with, and I'm sympathetic to that. But at the same time, you gotta actually work on your issues, right? Instead of just pretending they don't exist. Otherwise, you're gonna keep having all kinds of problems in your life in every area, right? So that's my sister. So I decided to kind of like distance myself from her. By the way, my what we're talking about here now, as far as my obligations to toxic family or anyone's obligations to toxic family applies. I'm talking about this with my grandparents that I'm going to be talking about here in a second, as well as my sister. And I'll share why, where I'm coming from as far as my thoughts and feelings. So my sister was sort of, like I kind of kept her, like, I kind of kept the door open to my life, you know what I mean, for my sister. We don't have a great relationship. It's not a horrible relationship, but it's very, unfortunately, as sad as it is, it's just, she is, we both come from a very toxic and dysfunctional background, but, I've chosen to work on myself and actually confront the issues head on and do something about them. And my sister has not, right? She just, she's one of these people who thinks she knows everything and everything's great, but she's got a lot of issues that are very apparent and blatant that she's just not, dealing with, including some substance abuse. So, part of me, I always had this. So I'll start at the beginning of this anyway. So she comes into my life within the last week or so, and I hadn't talked to her for maybe 2 years, right? And the main reason she was trying to get in contact with me was because my paternal grandparents are sort of, they're in their 80s. My grandfather has dementia at this point. He's losing his ability to take care of himself or function. He's kind of in that stage. My grandmother recently had a stroke, which, she survived, but you can tell, there's some, they're just at that point where their bodies, their minds are starting to break down, and they're sort of at the end of their life, right? And, so basically my sister comes in to my life and wants to talk about these grandparents of mine. Now, that grandmother I'm talking about is a narcissist, a hardcore narcissist, and one of the main narcissists that I've had to deal with in my life. My grandfather, I had probably the best relationship with out of anyone in my family, but he was, the truth is, he was an enabler of his narcissistic wife, right? He was an enabler of, he was a good man, right? He paid his taxes, he paid all his bills on time. He worked hard. He provided for his family. He wasn't a criminal. You know what I mean? He had a college degree, aeronautical engineer. He was a good person, mostly, right? I mean, he wasn't, he was on but the problem that he was having was there was a lot of emotional dysfunction, right? And really unhealthy, toxic stuff. I don't know what happened with his parents, but it was clear that once I learned about CPTSD, I began to think that he has CPTSD as well. In fact, I think a lot of members of my family do, to be honest with you, just going through that abuse. I think it's very possible that, my grandfather has CPTSD because he came from a really dysfunctional background. I know of some abusive stuff that happened in his life as a child, and he was just very cut off emotionally, he had no emotional intelligence, to the point where he would isolate, even in his house, in his room in the house. And I really believe it's because of the CPTSD, but he never, looked into any of that. But, so he attracted this narcissistic woman into his life, which is my grandmother. And he, instead of she was extremely abusive to him. She was extremely abusive to her kids. They have 4 children that are all in their 50s now, and many of their grandkids. And he enabled all this. And so a few years ago, and I probably had the best relationship with them as far as their grandchildren were concerned. I lived pretty close to them, and so I'd go over there. It was one of those deals where they had a pool, and we'd do cookouts and stuff and have the family over and cousins, and on the weekends or once in a while. When I got older in my teens, it was more of a regular, I would just go over there all the time. My grandpa was an engineer, as I mentioned, so he would help me with my math homework. It was just, honestly, it was nice to get away from my narcissistic mother. That's what it was. What's weird, you might be wondering why it was a relief to go to another house with another narcissist, being my grandmother. And it's because at the time, it was very weird. I mentioned this in some episodes before, but in my own house with my mother, I was the scapegoat. But at my grandma's house, I was the golden child. So I experienced both. So you got to understand, it wasn't healthy on an emotional level, but she treated me pretty well. You know what I mean? So my grandmother treated me personally a lot better than my mother, but she was very nasty and abusive. So she wasn't ever nasty or abusive to me because I was the golden child there, right? And so that's why it was more of a relief. It was just a relief to get away from my mother, but that didn't mean there wasn't still a lot of dysfunction. I mean, this is, by the way, this is the reality of kids who have to grow up in really toxic, emotionally and psychologically abusive and dysfunctional households and families, is that they're just trying to survive and live. And as kids, they want their families, right? But if everyone's toxic, it's what are you supposed to do? You know what I mean? You know what I'm saying? So I kind of was able to finagle. I had a better relationship over there, but it still wasn't healthy. However, years later, there came a point where I was actually living with my grandparents because I had to get out of my mom's house. That's what was going on. And unfortunately, that's when everything really changed as far as my relationship with my grandmother went, because I went from being the golden child to being the scapegoat merely because I was living there, right? So her behaviors, it's one thing if you come over once in a while or every other weekend or something, but if you're living with someone, they can't hide like their behavior and the way that they are for long. So she started in, right? Like it was like the same stuff that would happen with my mother. And she, just the interrogations and the put downs and the nitpicking and the sort of like thought policing and always like ask, it's like, and everyone's like walking around on eggshells. And so I started like it was like I used to hang out with my grandma like on the couch in the living room. We'd like watch TV and laugh and have ice cream and stuff. But it got to the point where I just started like going into my room more and isolating just to get away from her, right? Like just to be quiet, to get out of her space, but also because she's so like she became really abusive towards me, right? So that's when everything went downhill there. And my grandfather, what happened was like and this is really what this is where there was like a fundamental like betrayal, like on an emotional level of my grandfather, because I mentioned I did have a good relationship with him, but and this is my problem with the enablers of the narcissists, regardless of who what role they are in your life, is that they, especially if you're living with them, this is what really bothers me. When other people see the narcissist's behavior, right? Like it's one thing if I try to go tell this story to some people out and they have no idea what I'm talking about just because they've never dealt with narcissists before. But if you're there, like if you've seen it, if you've endured some of the narcissist's wrath or terrible behavior yourself, directed at you, and you've seen other people, have to deal with it, and you consciously choose to turn a blind eye and bury your head in the sand and pretend, because what he was doing was trying to hold the dysfunctional dynamic together, rather than deal with the actual issue, which was, yes, it was my narcissistic grandmother, but at the same time, there was a correlation between his own you know what I'm saying? Like, and many times if you want to deal with something in a real way, you have to be honest and clear, right? And you have to do that with yourself. And if you're in a position where you don't want to do that with yourself because you're uncomfortable of what you might find within, you're more like, this is why people stay in dysfunctional, unhealthy, and abusive relationships, right? And so basically what happened was my grandmother was like attacking me. Oh, like it was like the classic just nonstop, and look, I was either in my room when I was there or I was out and about. At that time I was in film school, so I was out, I had friends, I was filming things, I was in a studio like editing video. I tried to stay out of the house as much as I possibly could. And she got mad about that, right? Like, so I just tried to stay away from her just because of how nasty and abusive she was. But of course I couldn't do that 24/7. So when I was available, she would, she'd like go in my room and read through my journals and just snoop around, you know what I mean? Or like gossip, it's just horrible. It was like, who wants to live like that? So it got to the point where I was there with both of them and she was attacking me. And I basically went to my grandfather and I was like, Grandpa, grandma's like out of control here. Like she's, can you help me here? Like, can you like get my back or something? And the thing is, like, in that moment, he chose her. Like, and even though he knew her behavior was not right, he chose to allow me to be abused by my grandmother. And when I was talking about, I was like talking, like trying to get her to stop and trying to get all the insanity to stop. And he told me that I should be quiet. And, the first thing I said was, and that's what it is, right? That's what they really want. The enablers and the narcissists, they want you to basically just be quiet, pretend like nothing's happening, and just accept the abusive, toxic behavior. Now, I can ignore it, right? Like if there's chaos going on in the house, again, I can leave the house or go in my room. But when it's directed at me, when I'm under attack, whether it's verbal or whatever it is, what am I supposed to do? You know what I'm saying? Like she's the one attacking me here. Like she sought me out. Right? She came to me and was, I'm trying to, and that's what I said to them. I was like, I try to be quiet. Like, that's, what I mean? Like, the problem isn't, the truth is it was all complete BS and he knew it and he chose to go along with it wasn't just BS. It was BS that was toxic and hurtful for me and for everyone. And instead of dealing with the issue, which everyone in my family knows, it's my grandmother. Even as a child, I remember, my father, his brothers and sisters, like everyone knew she was the problem. She used to have a serious alcohol problem, but, she stopped drinking, but she's still a narcissistic lady. Everyone knows, everyone knows. And they just chose to let that happen. So fast forward a few years later, and I was in another abusive household. And the reason this keeps happening, or it kept happening, was because, number one, because my emotional energy signature or whatever was all messed up from my own family and that dysfunction. I kept attracting other dysfunctional roommates and stuff, you know what I mean? If I was renting a room or I would just attract other, plus I was having trouble holding down jobs, and I was working lower wage jobs and stuff. And so it's just in that lower, you know what I mean? World, lower class world or whatever, you know what I mean? So it got to the point where I was living somewhere I had to leave, and I was living out of my car. I mentioned this before, but this is the key moment with my grandparents, right? And this ties back into, what's happening now with them being older and stuff is, I was living out of my car in South Florida, as I mentioned, and I was living I was staying at a hotel right down the street. And when I say a hotel, I mean the parking lot, right? Mostly, you have to kind of, you got to kind of move around when you're homeless or living in your car, but you just want to blend in and make it look, you know what I'm saying? So I like to stay in areas that were nicer areas where there wasn't as much crime or whatever. You know what I mean? So anyway, they found, I didn't even tell them that I was living out of my car, but they found out, and they said, they just automatically said, well, you can't come here. We hope you can get your life together. Now, the reason my life I was having trouble was because of CPTSD from the narcissistic abuse. It wasn't because I was a heroin addict or anything like that. None of that was happening. I was literally struggling, and they didn't care. They did not care. They didn't care. They didn't care to the degree that they had no problem with me being homeless. The reason is because my narcissistic grandma loved it because I was suffering and she knew it. What she wanted was me to try to come grovel to her or try to get back on the same. The real problem with me, as I'm sure most of you know by now, with these people is that I simply don't go along with the dysfunctional BS. Right? I always stand up and say stuff. So they didn't let me, it wasn't just that, I didn't ask to come over. By the way, my father was over there living with them, right? Because he's got 5 different kids, 3 different women. He's got all this child support and back child support and all this stuff. And it's why does he get to live? By the way, I never did anything to my grandparents, right? I was never a criminal. I never did anything bad. I was always their favorite. They were just, what it really was I was not going along with the narcissistic abuse. And if someone, I would just always speak up. Especially, I could mind my own business, right? Do my own thing. But if she would attack me or something, I'm not gonna pretend all this stuff isn't happening. So anyway, I just felt totally abandoned and treated like trash. You're just tossing the trash out to the curb by those people, my grandma and my grandpa. By the way, my dad knew, and he didn't help me either. If I was a father and one of my kids was out, I would do everything in my power to help them, including getting helping them maybe get a hotel room or something. You know what I'm saying? Honestly, I would trade places with my kid. If I was living somewhere and, and they were out on the street, I would switch places with them because I believe that's what a loving parent should do, right? Or, just listen to this. Why is this happening? See, it's not that I'm the bad person and they're all great. It's that they're bad and I'm not going along with it. So that's what happened. So fast forward to now, my sister comes back in. She's like, oh, I've been on the phone with grandma, and grandpa's in the hospital, and grandma had a stroke and all this stuff. And she wanted to, again, we're up here in the North Carolina area. My grandparents and father are down in South Florida. And, she wanted to go down there to visit them. And she wanted me to go down, or it's almost like she wanted to go down there and rescue them or something, even though she didn't have nearly as good of a or close relationship with them as I did, previous to all this stuff that I mentioned before. But, it's like, because I mentioned that my grandparents have 4 kids, right? My dad, and then there's 2 other brothers and a sister, a daughter. They're all in their 50s. They all live down there. They all know what's going on. My dad actually lives in the house. So my sister had this idea that our grandparents were not being taken care of, which I just find that hard to believe. I mean, I don't, you know what I mean? Like, anyway, there's people that know what's going on with them. They're not like abandoned or anything. So she felt like she wanted to go down there and like, I don't know, rescue them or to become the guardian or caretaker or something. And I had no interest in that at all. And, she's tried this before too on different occasions where she tried to get me to, she'd like rope me back in to try to like calling them or go visit. And it's amazing how once you find out this pattern of narcissism, like, because I've heard other people talking about this type of thing where they try to, other members of the family or the cult, as I like to call it, if you're dealing with narcissistic abuse and personality disorder, is, they try to rope you back into the cult. That's what's going on. It's no different than like those Scientology, like when someone leaves Scientology and then those people like go to their house and start harassing them and stuff. It's like, first of all, can't you see? Why don't you leave that person alone? I mean, what are you doing, man? Like, they go out and harass. What are you doing? Right? Just leave them alone. So anyway, my sister tried that before, and I've always said, and that was a big reason why I didn't talk to her for so long, was because she had a real problem respecting my personal boundaries. She just wouldn't do it, right? So, it's kind of like my sister and I have this relationship where like a couple years will go by and I'll see if she's changed at all, and give her a shot, like just talk to her and see. And so far, anyway, she never has changed at all. She's just likes to hit the sauce and talk crap, you know what I mean? And try to, she really, it's like codependent a la mode, right? Like it's like she's just obsessed with trying to fix and control and micromanage everyone around her, like whether it's me or as I said, other members of our family, or even, I've been out to eat at restaurants with her, she'll just start talking to the servers. Like she's just one of these people that wants to like get into people's lives and control everything. You know what I mean? It's like you don't understand that I've seen this whole song and dance. I've been to Coda. You know what I mean? Like, this isn't healthy. I don't want to be around this. And she still doesn't understand that. But so I said, okay, so I'm not going down there. I'm not going to go visit them. I honestly don't care. Like, on an emotional level, like, I'm done. Like, the truth is, as you know, as the listener, like, what they did in that one instance with the living out of the car, that was cold and hurtful. But, that was just sort of the cherry on top of the sundae, right? Like, it was already an unhealthy family. Like, I going no contact is what is what I would have done regardless of whether I was in my car or not. You know what I mean? So I don't want to have any contact with narcissistic, abusive people. It's as simple as that. And my sister's the type of person that's like, oh, they're not, it's like, you just got to forgive. It's that person. I know someone like that in your life, right? That person who's just constantly enabling abusive, toxic behavior. And what's weird is they don't seem to have any problem with the abusive person's behavior, but they have a problem with you not wanting to be around it. It's so weird. It's so bizarre. Right. So, so I started thinking, like, when my sister and I parted ways, I was like, all right, my grandparents are sort of like and I won't see my grandmother, but my grandfather, like he was an enabler of the I just don't want to be around any of that stuff, and I really, so basically they're on death's door. I don't want to visit them at all. I don't want to have anything to do with those people. But I began to, like having a podcast like this and having this, degree of awareness about all this stuff still has that sort of nagging feeling in the back of my mind. Like, do I have some responsibility here because these are my family members? And that really applies to my grandparents and their condition now. But that also kind of ties into my sister, as I just mentioned, and my other siblings and stuff. I'm always wondering, like, do I have an obligation to these people? Like, what is my obligation, or to go see them if they're dead, or do I need to take care of these people, or you know what I mean? So I just got into that kind of like thinking, that thought process of kind of like confusion and uncertainty. And to be honest, I just don't care. Like, on an emotional, I don't want to have anything to do with those people. I just want to get out. I mean, I still got my own issues to deal with that I'm trying to iron out. because of all this crap. And they don't care about me. And that's the thing, right? Like, they don't care. And when I say they don't care, I mean, they don't care how I'm doing. They don't care how I'm feeling. They don't care how I've been treated. They don't care about any of that, right? And my sister doesn't either. It's just, and I don't even know what's weird about her in this situation is that she doesn't, it's like, she hasn't talked to our grandparents in decades. I mean, you know what I mean? Like, she doesn't really have a relationship with them at all. And when I mentioned like going over there all the time to visit with the cousins and stuff, my sister was very rarely there. My sister was there like when she was a kid and we were with her parents. But I kind of continued into my teens, again, just to get out of my narcissistic mother's house, but also to kind of hang out with my cousins, go swimming or whatever. We'd have, fun and stuff. But my sister, there came a time where my sister just wasn't, because let's face it, like, it's not that common for people the grandkids to be hanging out at their grandparents' house so often. We just had this set up with a pool and like, it's just better. It was just nice to get out of the house because my cousins had a narcissistic father as well. It was, what I'm saying? It was just nice to get out of there for a little bit. Even though there, what I'm saying? Like, even though there was more dysfunction at the house we were going to, at least we could go in the pool, you know what I mean? Or get something to eat. So, because no contact's hardcore, man. You know what I'm saying? It really is hardcore. I don't even, like, I don't know, man. I mean, you got to be like a monk level, non-attached type of a person in order to really, when you're talking about your whole family, going no contact with the narcissist is easy for me. But what's harder for me is all the other people that aren't necessarily narcissists, but they're also not healthy emotionally. It's very difficult. It's like, because I'm the oldest sibling, right? I'm the big brother for all these kids. And it's like, do I need to get in touch with them at some point and give them some money, or do I, because what I'd really like to do is just wipe the slate clean of all the people in my life, heal to, or continue to heal and get myself to where I'd like to be emotionally and psychologically and spiritually and all that. And then sort of reboot my life with all new people, like a whole new cast, which may include my own personal family with maybe a wife and my own kids one day. But I want it all to be healthy, right? So I kind of want to just get away from all these people. And, so that's kind of where we're at with the topic of this podcast is what is our obligation here? Like, what is my obligation? And so the conclusion I came to, which I already kind of knew anyway, but your obligation is to you, right? Because you may be in a situation like this now, or you may be like this in the future or something, or maybe you've had this in the past. Your obligation when you're dealing with really toxic and abusive people is to you and your own health and well-being and doing what's best for you, right? And only you know what that is, or maybe a doctor or somebody like that, but you know what's best for you. You know what you need. You know what makes you feel good and what's healthy for you on an emotional level. And, you don't have, if you've got people in your life that are toxic or abusive, that's their problem. Honestly, that's kind of where it's just kind of, this is one of those issues where you just have to be strong. Honestly, that's what it comes down to, is like, it's not about them. You see how they're still trying to make it about them? It's about me. It should be about me and my well-being, because they don't care about me. Even my sister, she doesn't care about me, really. Like, she just cares about getting something from me, or, you know what I'm saying? Like, something she needs. So that's what you got to keep that in mind. Your obligation is to you. And if you have kids, it's, you have an obligation to take care of your kids, obviously. But other than that, your main obligation is to you, making sure your needs are met, making sure you're healthy and happy and whole and free, and being around other people that respect you and your boundaries and you as an individual person and being. That's you're the CEO of your life, basically. So it's like, that's, to me, you're not obligated to anybody who's treating you like garbage or being abusive or exposing you to toxic environments. And as hard as cold as it might sound, these people did these things to themselves. My narcissists and enablers and yours and all these other, this is that moment, right? This is that moment where it's like, okay, you treated me like trash and now you're at the end of your life. I don't know what to tell you. So just take care of yourself, do what's best for you, and don't worry about anyone who, and that's another thing. It's like there's this whole thing about family, right? And even like on these different shows and movies, you always hear people talking like, oh, family is nothing's more important than family. And it's like, I've never had that experience. I just never understood, like, if you got a really nice, loving, healthy family dynamic, sure. But if you don't, that's why that kind of, and I know a lot of us have heard stuff like that. Like, you got to be loyal to your family or whatever. And so that's where you can get confused, because it's like, well, what if they're abusive and toxic and stuff like that, right? Like, so I don't really subscribe to that whole family is that, I mean, I think it's good to have healthy people in your life, a healthy network, healthy friends, healthy relationships. And if that can include your biological family, great. But I think you shouldn't, if they're toxic or abusive, you should get away from that stuff, no matter who they are, including family. Your obligation should be to you and your well-being. And if they can't, treat you with just a basic, decent respect, that's their problem, right? So it's not about them. This is where you got to like close the door on these type of people, right? You just close the door. It's over, just even on an emotional level. And so unfortunately, that kind of already happened with my grandparents, but it wasn't, I'm not even down there, right? So it's that, that's a moot point. It's more of just what's happening inside my mind and my emotional self. I guess that's pretty much all I wanted to talk about for this episode. What our obligation is to toxic family members. I don't think you have an obligation to toxic family members. Again, I think your obligation is to you and your well-being and doing what's best for your own happiness and health. And frankly, safety. A lot of people are in really abusive, violent, situations in households and stuff. I mean, so you got to do what's best for you. Put you first. That should be your mantra. Me first. It feels a little weird at first because we've never been treated that way, but we've got to, especially the codependent types, we have to do that me first type of a thought process. And if you're in a situation like this, don't feel bad. Don't feel bad about leaving toxic people or whatever. I mean, again, they choose to act like this. They, that's their garbage. It has nothing to do with you. And shame on them for treating you like that, or even, feeling that you deserved that kind of behavior or treatment or neglect or whatever it is, right? You deserve the best, not garbage. So that's what I wanted to share with you today. I hope you guys are doing well, and I'll see you in the next episode. Take care.